is my great pleasure to begin our program with a brief introduction of our guest, John Jablonski, after which I will turn the conversation over to Jamestown's and the Jackson Center's own Greg Peterson. John Jablonski III has recently transitioned to serve as the Special Projects Coordinator for the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy after having served as its co-founder, president, and then executive director for over 32 years. And he uniquely came well prepared for this important career and service to our lake and to our county. John studied fisheries, soil science, limnology, ecology, and environmental law at Cornell University, earning a Bachelor of Science degree in natural resources from Cornell. He then immersed himself in soil and water conservation, applied lake management, water resources institutions, strategic planning, real estate, land use law, and environmental economics at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, receiving a master's degree in urban and regional planning there, with a concentration in water resources. This extensive expertise has since been utilized across every organization dedicated to land conservation and water quality across North America, as well as locally for our own precious Lake Chautauqua resource. He has also served on civic boards in Genesee County, New York, Chatham, Massachusetts, and of course locally for Jamestown and the village of Lakewood. His resume is indeed extensive. This, however, is but a glimpse into who John is, as we are about to discover. And so, it is now my great pleasure to welcome John Jablonski in conversation with Greg Peterson.
Thank you, Maureen, and thank you, John Jablonski. This is a thrill for me because we're going to try to get to know about you. And most importantly, you're a native of Batavia, New York. Were you a fan of the Batavia Muck Dogs?
They were the Trojans back then.
Oh, okay. And the members of the New York Penn League?
Yes, they were.
Were you a baseball fan?
I enjoyed going to their games when I was in middle school and high school. It was a great place to socialize as a teenager.
Who were they affiliated with?
Montreal at that point, I think.
Mm-hmm. So there you go, Batavia.
Actually, I don't remember for sure.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm mixing it up with Jamestown at this point.
Batavia Trojans, and I can remember those guys. And so you grew up in Batavia. Tell me a little bit about your mom and dad.
I had wonderful parents. My mom is still alive. My father liked to play golf. My father was very much into sports and hunting and fishing. And my mother loved sports and still loves sports also. So they both played softball and a variety of sports. And they started bringing my brother and I here in 1964 to Miller's Cottage Resort on Chautauqua Lake at Point Chautauqua. Because my father liked to golf and fish, and it was right below the Point Chautauqua golf course, and he could rent a boat and keep it there and go fishing as well as golfing.
How did he find Chautauqua?
Someone he worked with vacationed here and had a cottage down here. So one of his workmates said, "Hey, I know you enjoy fishing. You should check out Chautauqua Lake."
What would your dad do for a living?
He was a machinist.
Okay. And what was the name of the business?
Eastman Kodak.
For a very
large corporation employing about 35,000 people in Rochester at the time.
Yeah. So I suspect you used Eastman Kodak cameras when you were growing up.
Yes, very much so. My father bought every new product that they put out, and we have lots of slides and 8mm and Super 8 films and all kinds of pictures and instant camera pictures and all those things.
It just says nothing to do with anything, but since you talked about cameras, shutter speeds, we remember, 200, 800, 1600 shutter speeds. Over here, the most famous picture, the Robert Jackson Center, is in color in 1945, and the photographer used it, and the shutter speed was 20.
Wow.
Can you imagine? Whoa. It's just, we digress completely from Eastman Kodak. So you're in Batavia, and you grew up there and did you go to school there?
Yes, Batavia High School.
And from there, did you graduate? What year did you graduate?
I graduated in 1978 and, went to Cornell that fall to be a fisheries biologist.
Then, what triggered you? Was it something just going around with your dad to various being outside in the outdoors, or was there an aha moment that said, I want to do this?
I was fortunate to have a father who brought us to Chautauqua Lake every summer, and so we were here at least a week or 2 weeks every summer, and we camped at the Moose Club on Chautauqua Lake back then. And I had a great uncle who loved to take my brother and I fishing on a creek outside of Rochester, New York, where we went at least once a week in the summertime when we were in our teenage years. And so between the two of them, my brother and I really developed a love for fishing and being on the water. And being at Chautauqua Lake every summer was the highlight of the year.
And at Cornell, was that just an easy leap then to get into was this the ag school?
Yes.
The ag school at
Yes.
Cornell. Did they have majors in that kind of areas?
Yes, they had wildlife science and fisheries science, so I started off as a fisheries major, but really we had a broad biological background with geology and soil science and aerial photographic interpretation and various environmental law courses on top of that.
So you got some land stuff and then also some water stuff, right?
I wanted to understand what was living on the ground and why, and putting it all together with the geology and the soils and what was living in those soils made sense for to understand why you saw what was living there, growing there.
During the summers, did you have kind of on-hand experience where they would want you to go out and work at one of the Finger Lakes or something like that?
I was very fortunate to work at the Cornell Biological Field Station at Oneida Lake under Dr. John Forney and Dr. Ed Mills, and they did phenomenal perch walleye studies on that lake that were ongoing for many years. And I got to, as part of that, they also had walleye studies going on Chautauqua Lake, so I got to press walleye scales from Chautauqua Lake for them to age at a later time. But it was really a wonderful experience working for really credible scientists on Oneida Lake and learning about how the perch and the walleye interacted. Their populations went up and down in relation to the abundance of the other.
What did you learn?
Well, I learned...
about that perch walleye thing.
Well, their perch was the primary prey of the walleye, so if there was a lot of small perch to eat, the walleye population grew well, to the point where the walleye population trimmed back the perch population, and then the walleye population would go down. So pretty typical predator-prey relationship, and learned a lot about how different fish, what they ate over the course of the season, because every week we went out with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and did a very long gill netting set, and would go out and pick the net up and sample all the fish, all the stomachs of all the fish we collected and measure and weigh them, and doing that for about 12 weeks gives you a pretty good idea of what all the different fish were eating that whole summer.
Well, when you got a perch, did you actually tag it? Did you put out any identifying marks on it?
Unfortunately, they died because they were gill nets.
Oh, okay. What's that mean?
They're gill nets. The fish swim into it, and they get the monofilament gets caught.
Oh, I see.
Their head gets caught in, and they can't back out of it.
Gotcha.
So
there's no afterlife.
No. They let us keep enough to eat personally, for a couple of meals. After we were done doing all the scientific analysis, and unfortunately the rest got buried in the woods.
So this was part of, you learned how to fillet, you learned...
I kind of lost my interest in eating red meat that summer, and my main form of protein became fish.
Is that right?
Yes.
Oh, interesting. So was that a one-year study then?
It was a summer internship from June, July, and August.
Okay. And did you help the professors write any studies? Were you one of those authors,
I did not write any of the work there. I picked the fish out of the nets, measured the fish, pressed fish scales to slides. Mainly those were helped with putting out the nets,
Did you,
helped bury the fish.
and eat the fish? And so and you worked a lot with the DEC?
Yes, they were part of the weekly sampling.
So as you also did Oneida Lake, you did Chautauqua Lake too?
Well, I did not do field work on Chautauqua Lake,
Okay.
only Oneida Lake.
But they got information from Chautauqua Lake as part of their
As
study?
part of what I was doing was, we have major walleye runs up DeWittville Creek and Prendergast Creek on Chautauqua Lake, and Cornell was contracted by DEC to study those fish. And so they collected them, they netted them in the tributaries, and pulled scales off, put them in envelopes, and then my job was to take those slides, those scales, put them on a microscope slide that was plastic, and put them in a press and press the scales onto the slide so that it would leave an impression that on the slide that they could put under a microscope and age the fish.
Really?
And then they knew, based on the information on the envelope, the length of the fish and other,
From the scales?
well, no, not from, they knew the length of the fish when they caught it and
Yeah.
pulled the scale out of it.
Okay.
So
But
then
the-
they could ascertain the growth rate of the fish by its size, and some of those fish were up to 9 pounds out of
Really?
Prendergast and DeWittville Creek.
Wow, wow. When you catch a fish, I mean, the size does that mean the bigger it is, the older it is? Or is there some other criteria they look at?
In most cases, the bigger or the older, but as they get older and less active, they tend to get thinner.
Is that, so I got something to look forward to where I get a little bit less active, I too will get thinner?
If
Is
your
this-
digestive tract is not working as well and you can't chase down those prey that you're chasing, you'll get skinny.
Okay, there we go. Hope springs eternal. Okay, good deal. That may be the walkaway of tonight for all you listening here. But that gets you through Cornell, and you graduated with a BS, Bachelor of Science, and then where?
I started off as a planner for Genesee County Planning Department and worked there for 2 years.
And Batavia being part of Genesee County?
Yes.
Okay.
So I did that for 2 years, and I was the staff for the County Environmental Management Council and their Sewer and Water Agency, and they did a major waste management study while I was there, and I was the liaison between the department and the engineers, and also worked on agricultural district creation and renewal, so undertaking that process of working with the landowners and sending out all the notices in the area, which is something still exists, and Chautauqua County still does the same thing that we were doing back then in the 1980s.
Was there a time then when you were working as a civil servant that you decided you wanted to go back and do some more schooling?
Yes, as I was there, I realized that there were areas in the field of planning that I thought I needed to learn how to do better. And for instance, I was interested in environmental economics, and I also continued to be interested in lake and watershed management, and wanted to build up my expertise in those areas.
So there, what would you decide to do?
Well, I applied to University of Wisconsin and Michigan State, and University of Wisconsin being on beautiful lakes and being really where the science of limnology developed, decided to go to Wisconsin.
And so there's University of Wisconsin-Madison.
Yes.
Right. That's a beautiful place, beautiful place. And you got your MS degree in urban and regional planning with concentration in water resources. So that was a definition of that, there, getting your master's in water resources. I mean, that was,
You could major in water resources as a graduate student, or you could be in the urban and regional planning department and just take a concentration in that or land resources. So I was fortunate to be able to take planning courses and courses, science related and applied soil and water conservation and lake management and things like that, as well as the planning courses.
aside from water resources there, did you learn about the badgers? I mean,
I am a big Badgers fan, so.
For those, that's the mascot for Wisconsin. Then did you know that this is going to launch, this is going to be a career?
Well, when I drove back to Western New York from Madison, I had a job interview for the Tip of the Mitt Watershed Council in Tip of the Mitt, Michigan, Petoskey, Michigan.
Ah,
And they had a wonderful program for advocacy for waterways. There are beautiful lakes and waterways up there. And I liked what they were doing. I didn't get the job, but I thought, wow, that is really a neat model for engaging people to take care of our waterways. So after coming back, I worked for the Westfield Water Department that summer after I graduated. The second summer I worked there during graduate school. And then got a job in Cape Cod with the town of Chatham and worked as the assistant town planner out there for a year. And while I was out there, I learned about land trusts and actually came up with a concept of the Chautauqua Watershed Alliance while I was out in Cape Cod. It's very, very quiet in the wintertime on the Cape and before the internet.
Yep.
So I came up with a concept loosely based on what the organization that I interviewed with in Michigan.
so I'm visualizing you just had a whiteboard or a yellow legal pad, and with nothing better to do, and a cold night at Cape Cod, you start scribbling.
Just writing down the ideas of an organization, and no internet at that time,
Sure.
so wasn't a lot of way of researching other groups. But I was probably already a member of the Nature Conservancy, and so I knew about what they were doing. And then I got the opportunity to work, and I knew I wanted to work back in Western New York, so I got the opportunity to apply and be hired as the city planner and grants coordinator for Jamestown in 1987. So I moved back here and worked there for 5.5 years and continued to develop the concept and met people like Becky Nystrom and Don Weaver and others who were saying the same things at meetings about, we need to manage what causes the weeds and the algae, not just, use chemicals and harvest them. We need to address the root causes.
So again, I'm going to go back a little bit to Massachusetts, and you have that yellow pad, and you're making notes. What notes are you making? What's the concept? What's the John Jablonski genesis of a conservancy?
It was the idea at that time of bringing all the existing organizations together to create a concept which is kind of like what the alliance, what the Chautauqua Lake and Watershed Management Alliance is now.
Okay.
That was the original concept. I tried to get the Chautauqua Lake Association involved. Couldn't convince them to hire me. And just couldn't get any traction for the idea of creating an alliance when I first moved back. But continued to work with people and have early morning breakfast meetings in downtown with people who were interested in protecting and helping the lake. Try to get people up and early to have breakfast and meet. And so we kept meeting, and we couldn't create an alliance at that time, but we came up with the concept of a land trust watershed lake advocacy organization, and worked with other people who were doing the same thing, and had help from the Nature Conservancy to help conceptualize the idea. Andy Zepp, who for his master's degree at Cornell, came up with the concept for the Finger Lakes Land Trust.
Okay.
And Andy Zepp was working in Rochester for the Nature Conservancy, and Andy Zepp would come down and meet with us and say, this is what the Finger Lakes Land Trust is doing, here's their information, you can do something similar here. So he was a big help in that effort. And we then worked with Judith Clara and Robert Van Every, who incorporated us and helped us with all of our paperwork required to apply as a not-for-profit and certificate of incorporation in New York State. And we incorporated in October of 1990 and were born as an organization.
Well, tell me a little bit about the originators. I mean, you're one of the co-founders. That's the term that's used here. I know you're the idea guy. You're the guy who kind of stirring the pot. I get that concept. And who was the other, you mentioned Fritz Co., who were some of the other?
Becky Nystrom was there from the beginning. She was saying the same things at the meeting as I was saying at these lake meetings back when John Lunsman was county planning director. And then after the meeting, we'd get together and talk because she was making the same points or similar points. And Al Calla, who has recently passed away, he was a draftsman landscape architect for the city of Jamestown. And I worked in the planning and development office in Jamestown, and he worked next door at Public Works. And so we socialized, we talked a lot at City Hall, and he was a good friend of Becky's. And Becky Albaugh, who was an educator at Audubon, also came on board. She was a friend of Becky at the time, and so the four of us were the incorporators of the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy.
And Becky Nystrom at the time, was she at JCC?
Yes,
Okay. And what did she teach down there?
she was a biology
Biology.
professor.
So
yes.
she comes to the table with a science backdrop.
Becky did her master's degree at SUNY Fredonia, and her master's thesis were on the plants of Chautauqua Lake.
Ah,
So that's her expertise.
so you coalesce these folks who have like interest to a common cause.
Yes,
And it became the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, Inc., I suspect.
yes.
Did you have any money?
No. When we started, we didn't have any money, but being a grants writer for the city of Jamestown served me well. In the fall of 1992, I stayed up very late at night for many nights and submitted a grant proposal to the Gebbe Foundation, and Don Weaver was friends with Buck Franks at the time, who was their vice president. And Buck told Don, gee, put a proposal in, we'll see what we can do. So I drafted a proposal to hire a person 13 hours a week and buy a computer and a printer and a photocopier. And somehow, some way it got funded. And the board decided, which at that time was a very small board, decided to offer me the job of executive director at 13 hours a week in 1993. And the hard part was leaving City Hall. I tried to work half-time there, but which my boss, Sam Teresi, wanted to keep me on half-time. And unfortunately, the Human Resources Office at the time said they didn't want a half-time employee working for the city, so that didn't work out. And so I left the city in March of 1993 after resigning to end at the end of the year of December.
So you launch by yourself on the...
Stepped off a cliff.
Well, I'm thinking this is really an act of courage here.
And an act of courage on my wife's part as well.
You stole my next question, you know. So you explained that to Carol, right? Carol, your wife?
Yes.
And saying, hey, honey, I love you, but, you know, I'm going from a full-time job with perks to a $13,000 a year job. And how did she take it?
I think with a lot of apprehension, but she has always believed in me. And at the time, we had a 2-year-old daughter, our first daughter, and we needed a new childcare arrangement than what we were working with at the time. And we decided one of us was going to stay home part-time, and it worked out, since I started this new entity, that I would be the stay-at-home dad.
So that filled in the other time, so.
Yes, but...
Because I know 13 hours didn't mean 13 hours. You're thinking 24/7.
Shortly thereafter, I was really lucky that the city of Jamestown and Village of Falconer and Town of Ellicott decided they wanted to apply for an economic development zone through the state of New York, and Sam Teresi talked to me and asked if I wanted to write the proposal for that. So I got very lucky and was fortunate that Sam had faith in me to do that from my previous grants writing experience, and I was able to work from November until March the following year, so I ended up earning as much money the first year I was off as I had when I was working at City Hall, by virtue of both of being the consultant working on the economic development zone and being the 13-hour-a-week executive director.
Did you ever, at some point you have a dream. There's a dream, there's a vision, but ultimately you got to get to a strategic plan. I mean, ideas, step one, step two, step three, what it is you might want to vision. Was that a difficult process for you?
Well, we knew we didn't like what was happening. We saw, I experienced as a child what happened at Chautauqua Lake Estates when that was developed, and the impact that had on the lake. Our family cottage is right near Crosswinds and Chedwell Club, and there were really bad impacts to the lake from those developments, with soil running into the lake, providing a fertile rooting bed for the plants to grow. So we knew pretty much at the outset that we wanted to conserve the Cheney Farm Lakeshore, the Stowe Farm Lakeshore, the wetlands at Prendergast Point, the wetlands at Goose Creek. There were several sites that we knew starting up that we really wanted to conserve because they were either steep slopes on the lake, and if developed would release a lot of sediment through erosion, or wetlands that we knew we didn't want developed. So I think we had a good sense of the big projects we wanted to do on Chautauqua Lake right from the outset.
Was the obtaining of title through easements, deeds of property so they would not be developed? Principally, right? I mean,
Yes.
conservation easements, it takes many forms, but maybe you can explain a few of those. Kind of as you
Well,
go to for example, pick Cheney, I guess.
Okay, that's a big one.
It's a huge one. What was the genesis of that? I mean,
Okay, so you have an organization that's 3 years old and has a new executive director and has no money basically other than what we have from, at that point, probably less than 100 donors. And so I worked closely with the Cheney family and John Cheney to market that land to the state of New York. And I knew we didn't have the resources to buy it. So I ran around the county with John Cheney in my car, going to the Rod and Gun Club meetings, conservation clubs, getting people to try to sign on and get letters of support. We actually got the county legislature to pass a resolution or motion back in around 1994 requesting that the state fund the conservation of all remaining lakeshore left undeveloped on Chautauqua Lake. This was, I think it was in 1994 or 1995. To get the legislature to do that was incredible. We had bipartisan support. People like Nancy Barger and Gil McKenna carried it through, and they were people who cared very much about the lake, and party didn't matter. What mattered to them was the health and beauty and enjoyment of Chautauqua Lake. So after the county legislature passed a resolution supporting conserving the Cheney Farm and other sites, I worked closely with the state of New York and the Trust for Public Land, sent Eric Kulisade, who's now the state parks director, down to talk to the Cheney family. And, I met with John Cheney on his porch with a DEC official from Albany, and then the regional director came down, and as well as Eric Kulisade, and the regional director, Jerry Michael at the time, actually sat on John's porch with John and came up with a deal. So that was great. They finally, they got that section of it, got a deal in place, and at the same time, for like 2 years, the property was on the market. So I was keeping my fingers crossed that no one came and bought it from under us while we were trying to put this big thing together. So I think it was around 1990, I don't remember the exact year, 94 or 95, the first piece was purchased from John Cheney, and then it took another 10 years for the other, I think the other two families who were John's siblings to actually come to agreements with the state of New York to put that whole piece together down there, which is 6/10 of a mile long and about, I think it's 36 acres.
So that's the really first big score, if you will.
That was the biggest thing I could ever hope to accomplish in my lifetime.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you can, so when you look across the lake, and I live in Lakewood, and you see that just huge area of undeveloped land, and you know it's a Cheney farm. So how did, just this more, a little more of the dynamics of it all, the state actually bought it, and do they own it, or did they turn it over to you?
They own from Route 430 down to the lake, and on part of it, the Trust for Public Land pre-acquired it, and then the State Environmental Bond Act money came in to buy it from them. But in this other cases, I think the other sibling families sold it directly to the state.
And as a result of that, is it completely just off limits, or are there any qualifiers with the use of that Cheney land, title-wise?
It's essentially a state wildlife management area or state lake access area, so there's a parking area there for people to go down, and you know, it's a great place for people to go wade in the lake and fish, or just enjoy the waterfowl there. And you know, they still allow, part of it is managed as a hayfield, one third of it, I think. So they do allow, as they do at the at Tom's Point, there is some cropping that still goes on that site.
That's
So-
state-owned, and state gets the benefit of that.
Yes.
Not owner-related.
Yeah.
Because I am familiar with Tom's Point, Roger White, part of that. And was that a similar thing? 'Cause that
The
too.
Nature Conservancy pre-acquired that, I
Okay.
believe. And that was probably, I don't know, 8 or 10 years before the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy existed.
Okay. But those are two large parcels that could have been developed, and they were certainly developable properties. So with the Cheney farm in place, now what was the next one? What was the next big goal?
Well, the next one was the Stowe Farm Lakeshore. And, you know, that was interesting project. The waterfront there has about, well, the total property is about 18 acres, and most of the lakeshore does have a strip of wetlands along the lake. So
Where's this located?
just below what used to be the Good Morning Farm, and
Ah.
just south of the interstate
Okay.
area there. That went on the market, and I worked for many months to negotiate a deal with the Stowes, and you know, they truly wanted to keep it as it was, and we're looking for the opportunity as we're, you know, the Cheney family, to keep it as it was, because both of these families bought that land from the Holland Land Company, if you can imagine that. So it had been in their family for generations. So the interesting thing there was our board authorized me to sign the contract to buy the Stowe Farm Lakeshore for several $100,000, and a month later, 9/11 happened.
Oh, golly.
And suddenly, all state funding for things like that were frozen for nearly a year, and I'm like, uh-oh, we've got a contract for several $100,000, and you know, we had lined up, I think, maybe about $140,000 of funding from donors and local foundations, but the rest of it had to come from the state, and it was passed through us. It was to pass through us at closing to the state, but all the state money was frozen. So that was getting very nervous about that, because our organization was on the line, and you know, in our good word with the Stowe family, we didn't want to default on our contract. But you know, after all bets were off with what was going to happen after 9/11, so fortunately, about 2 months before the closing date in the contract, the state decided that they could release the money for land conservation projects, and the property did close, and, it was a very huge relief, and I think a relief to the Stowe family, and, it was, made me very happy that they could achieve their goal of conserving that and also be, paid well for the property that they took care of for over 100 years.
Yeah, yeah. And then the next big one?
Well, Midway Park was on the market, and I worked with
The Walshes?
I primarily worked on the angle with Dalton Burgett,
Right.
and he was on the Parks Commission at the time, and so the Conservancy worked behind the scenes to put together a proposal to submit to the Parks Commission regionally and at the state level to try to get the parks interested in saving and conserving the amusement park. And Bill Parment was very strongly behind it, our assemblyman of the area, and it just, it was very daunting. And at one point, like in August, Bill Parment and his wife came by our dock in kayaks and saw me standing there fishing off the end of the dock and says, "John, I just don't know how we're going to get this done. I'm really worried. I don't think we're going to be able to pull this off." And about a month later, Governor Pataki announced that there was going to be a press conference at Midway Park, and suddenly, much to our surprise, Governor Pataki came to Midway Park and stood at the podium with the Welches and announced that the state would be buying that Midway Park, and the place that I enjoyed from when I was 4 years old, and all my cousins and brother and my children enjoyed, was going to still be there.
Yeah. Yeah, somewhat part of that, so I appreciate the angle of it also. And then you also bought some lands from Lutheran as well, didn't you?
We
Or conservation
did a
easement?
$700,000 campaign to acquire a conservation easement on the north portion of their forest there, north of their main dining hall, between there and the next neighborhood.
Yeah,
So that was a three-year project and 3 years of fundraising, and Mark Baldwin was our president at the time, and our board came very close to giving up on that in the middle of it. But we were fortunate to have angels at foundations locally and in Buffalo, and private angels who lived across the lake or lived within a mile or two, who at various points said, "How much do you need?" And the Lene Foundation and the Went Foundation came through with lots of money for that project, and it was really a fantastic project because it conserved that very steep slope facing the Athenaeum and the bell tower, and it provided a lot of resources for the Lake Chautauqua Lutheran Center to put a new roof on its dining hall, upgrade some of its facilities, and actually created a start on an endowment fund. So it had a great conservation impact, and it also had a great impact on a local employer and a real community resource for the children of our area in Western New York.
well, I've seen you in action, so I know that you're, you talk about all these people with sources of fundings, but I know that it requires somebody to knock on the door and to make the pitch, and that's a John Jablonski. You really don't take no for an answer. I mean, I applaud. That's a fact. And what was your elevator pitch? I mean, so at the time, let's just use Lutheran, and you're talking to the foundations, and you'd say, here's why we need this money to get that property, frankly, off the development roll.
Well, I actually came up with a calculation as best as I could as to the amount of the thousands of tons of soil that would have been lost to Chautauqua Lake and adding to the weed growth of the lake if that site was bulldozed, as had been done at Chautauqua Lake Estates and Crosswinds. So I actually came up with a number.
So using your background, your
Right,
good
my soils
Cornell work,
background.
soil, erosion and all that?
Yeah,
So with that in mind, saying if we don't do this, we may lose the
at some point down
vitality
the
of the
road.
lake. Was that basically the pitch?
Well, that and the fact that, our church camps really are an important economic asset to the area and bringing in people from all over the place and employing people here in the summertime and, using local service businesses and food suppliers and everything else. Having those places are really, an asset in growing and raising the youth of our region to be good citizens when they grow up.
Where did you learn your salesmanship?
I don't know.
I mean, really, you're remarkable to see the game and the end game and to be able to match the funding to make that a reality when you don't have an endowment, I mean, or didn't have an endowment at the time. You were leveraging money.
We were fortunate to have a lot of people who had faith in the good people we had in our organization.
Yeah, yeah.
And we, at the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, have always had really, I think, the best science minds in Chautauqua County on board and behind us. So, I always felt very confident in my message. When you have people like Becky Nystrom and Jan Bowman and Twan Leanders on your team, they're the best of the best, and I think the funders could see that. So, and people like Mark Baldwin, who just, is a genius in his encyclopedic knowledge of the natural world, is just, amazing, as is, people like Twan and Becky.
As you hearken back a little bit, just the history, the guy who is the earliest, my early knowledge was really John Lunsman. Did you use some of his early studies of the lake and some of, he really did a lot, seemingly. Was that part of your world?
Yes, it was. I still have the entire Lunsman series that he had in the Post Journal. I think there were 8 or 12 stories that were in the insert in the Post Journal on Sunday or Saturday. I still have those in my file cabinet, and and then he put them on VHS, and we had those. I don't know if we still have the VHS of those in the Conservancy offices or not, but yes, those were a frequent reference. And I mean, you still can think of him when we talk about the lake levels and on an annual basis and the controversy about that. John delved into those things. John used to measure the snowpack every winter, of which we have none this winter.
Even I could have done it this year. No, I the John Lunsman, when we did a series at Turner early on, a few years ago, that was something I referred to. If we actually showed that, and I digitized it and I put it up.
Oh, that's
It's all
great.
on YouTube, all those
Oh,
VHS.
that's wonderful. I'm glad to know that.
Yeah, so that's up there. And so was the focus of the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy on conserving the land early on so that you identified those parcels that were developable and try to get them off the market? Was that kind of the principal thing you were looking at, or were there other aspects to it?
The two main issues were the loss of habitat on the waterfront, and so we focused on the steepest slopes, which were the Cheney Farm and the Lutheran Center Forest, and then we focused on the wetlands, which were Prendergast and Goose Creek, which were the largest wetlands on the lake. So those were our primary conservation focuses from the start, but soil erosion and trying to stop the really needless, unnecessary loss of soil from all the construction sites and road ditches dumping mud into the lake, because once the mud's in the lake, that provides the fertile rooting bed for the milfoil to grow more than it should. And so, we were, from the start, working on education. Why are wetlands important? We would have the Army Corps of Engineers and DEC come in every couple of years and do wetlands conservation seminars. They're just so important in stopping this mud from getting to the lake and the nutrients from getting to the lake that, that remains a bone of contention that our wetlands around the lake and in the watershed aren't protected enough yet. So that was a major area of education, as well as trying to get towns to deal with erosion control.
Specifically about one of the projects that I talked to the folks of the planning department today, the IDA. I said, give me your John Jablonski story. I was trying to do some research, and they said Grandview.
Ah, okay.
So they said that is a John Jablonski major moment, is the Grandview concept and seeing that into reality, which is what it will find form, I guess, maybe this year.
Yes.
So talk about the genesis of Grandview.
Well,
Maybe for the camera, we should talk about what I'm talking about, Grandview, where it's located.
this is the development above the Save-A-Lot Plaza, which is partially in Lakewood and partially up the hill in the town of Bustye. And that was developed in the 1990s, and the state did have a stormwater management law in effect. The developer at the time never built that. The town of Bustye had land set aside from the developer to do something there with stormwater, and it was never required by the town of Bustye or the village of Lakewood at the time. So that large lots, which was a forest, generates a tremendous amount of stormwater and nutrients to the lake. And as you would guess, there's a lot of use of lawn care chemicals and fertilizers up there. And so that just kind of sticks out as a sore thumb to a conservationist. When you take forest land, the runoff from a site like that is 5 times as much as it was when it was a forest. So, and it's probably almost that much more phosphorus coming off, or maybe even more than that, than when it was a forest. So looking at that, back in about 2018, came up with the idea of, gee, if we can put a series of ponds below it to capture that stormwater and slow it down, create wetlands at the base of the hill, maybe we can work with the town and the village to do that. So I came up with sketches, and we had at the time, Taylor West, who now works for the Lake Alliance, had graduated from college and was looking for work, and he helped me, with this stuff, and he took a whole bunch of pictures of the erosion there, and so we started working on that, and then twice since we started working on it, that area under the underpass flooded from the runoff from that development. So the flooding there really helped move along the idea of making the concept move into, the Conservancy got funding from the Lake Alliance to hire Andy Johnson at Eco Strategies to do a concept, do a basic engineering of what were my original sketches, and then we were fortunate to get over $200,000 of state funding through the Lake Alliance for the Village of Lakewood to actually hire contractors to actually put this in the ground with the help of the lake, in collaboration with the Lake Alliance. So last fall it was constructed, and this spring the landscaping will be finished, and hopefully there won't be flooding of Fairmont Avenue under the underpass anymore, and a lot of phosphorus and sediment that comes down the hill from those properties will be in a series of wetlands, which will be nice wildlife habitat and be a very pleasant place to walk. And our organization will be involved this spring in developing it for really nature observation.
So give me a Reader's Digest of what it was. I mean, start with a raindrop up at the top of Grandview. I'm familiar with that. And then what's gonna, as that raindrop works its way down, is there water, is there retention ponds?
It comes down the hill, the water from the roads go down the ditches that are going down the hill. They will hit a series of retention ponds, which will be constructed wetlands. If you see what's at our Loomis Goose Creek site, they'll look like that, but they'll be more or less rectangular. In a series along the upper side, above the upper side of the railroad tracks there behind the Save-A-Lot Plaza and and the driving range. And those ponds will be, I don't know, probably 40 or 50 feet wide, and the series of them will extend in various pools down to the end of the property behind the plaza, and they will develop with wetland vegetation and probably be enhanced with wood duck boxes and other things, and planted with native shrubs and trees, and they tried to leave as many of the trees as possible nearby. They were selective in what they took down, and in probably 3 or 4 years, it will be a very attractive place to birdwatch.
They gonna name it after you?
I don't know.
Taylor's your biggest fan. The Conservancy, well, let's do some statistics. The size of your conservation reach, let me just give you, for instance, I'm driving from Sugar Grove, Pennsylvania, towards Lakewood, on Big Tree Sugar Grove Road. And all of a sudden, I'm not even at the crest, working my way towards Maplehurst. And all of a sudden, there's a big sign that says, Chautauqua, welcome to the Chautauqua Conservancy, or something.
Chautauqua Watershed.
Chautauqua Watershed, thank you. I assume that's a demarcation that somehow you have done around the lake that.
We did that jointly with the Chautauqua County Soil and Water Conservation District. Our president at the time, Lyle Haidu, knew a friend of a friend, and they had funding, and in the Soil and Water Conservation District and the Conservancy had wanted to see that done for decades, and our president found someone to fund it, so the money came through us to Soil and Water to put these signs up.
So, but anyways, where the location of the signs.
It's the top of the ridge. All the water from those signs flows down the hillsides and into Chautauqua Lake, and some of them couldn't be put on the top of the ridge, but most of them are within a quarter of a mile.
So that's the idea, but so there's really a demarcation around that. John Lunsman talked about a location as you're leaving from Mayville to Westfield, up over the hill, there's a road that, in fact, a drop of water hits one side of the road, it ends its way into Chautauqua Lake, which then works its way down the Conowanga and ultimately Allegheny and down to the Gulf of Mexico. If it goes on the other side, it goes to Lake Erie and works its way other way. Where is that spot?
Oh, it's one of those farms at the top of the hill there as you go on Northport. You go from north on 394, north out of Mayville, probably 2 or 3 miles north of Mayville, really not too far past the school up there, where allegedly on one side of the road ditch is going to Chautauqua Lake and Gulf of Mexico, on the other side to Lake Erie, and the legend even gets better that there's a barn up there also with the same thing, where one side of the barn flows to Lake Erie, and I don't know if that's true or not, but yes, that's the top of the ridge it's a continental divide between the Gulf of Mexico and the North Atlantic.
You have to go down, I've never really found it, because I remember John talking about it. You're heading down towards, again, Westfield, and there's a road. There's a road to turn to the right, and you go up a little bit, and somehow it's there. Whatever. So I digress. But essentially, though, that's the demarcation of your conservancy.
Well, we are for the Chautauqua Lake Watershed, but the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy is county-wide.
Yeah.
So we will be opening a preserve on the boundary of Fredonia, on Berry and Johnson Roads in Fredonia this spring, and we have a new preserve on Lake Erie at the mouth of Chautauqua Creek. So those are our two northernmost preserves, and we have several properties on Cassadaga Lake and Cassadaga Creek, as well as the 2 miles we've worked with the state of New York to conserve on Chautauqua Lake. And we have 3/4 of a mile of the Chautauqua Lake outlet wetlands conserved.
So, of the lake itself, Chautauqua Lake, are there areas left to be obtained?
There are a few areas left that are still forested and wooded on the waterfront, and they're not as big as the ones that we conserved already. But we will continue to talk to the owners of the remaining few pieces and see if they are interested in conserving those.
So it's an object, but not necessarily the top priority?
It's not our focus. We try to converse with those people every few years and see if it's a possibility. Our main focus right now in the Chautauqua Lake watershed is we've done a GIS study. Jonathan Townsend, who is a PhD candidate at UB, did a GIS analysis for us of looking at the waterways and wetlands and floodplains and drinking water supplies and known important habitat areas. And so we've scored all the parcels in the county as to their ecological and hydrological value. And so now we're trying to focus on conserving those that are highest, where we can get the most bang for the buck on those properties for conserving habitat or conserving the quality of the water of our streams and lakes.
Was there a, and I know your tenacious nature, I mean, let me be the first to commend you for that. Was there a time, though, where you hit a wall and you said, I'm not sure we're making progress?
Well, I think there's a continual challenge that's been frustrating, that the municipalities around the lake still haven't adopted the stormwater management laws that we need in place, and we still don't have the laws and the enforcement we need. I think some of the towns are way further ahead than others, and that's an area that I had hoped to have seen more progress on. They're doing a better job on erosion control, and we really have made a lot of progress with local highway superintendents on road ditches and those projects, but still trying to get the towns to adopt the laws we need to keep soil on the properties and actually trap stormwater, which is polluted, and getting it to go in the ground, not directly into a waterway, is probably the biggest frustration that I've had in the last 30 years.
33 years, and after 33 years, the headline, Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy Executive Director stepping down in February. Co-founder John Jablonski III announced that Deputy Executive Director Whitney Gleason, that on February 15th, stepped down as Executive Director. So what's your advice to her? 33 years.
I think it's to set your goals high and find the best people you can find to deliver those goals, and stay true to the science. And don't give up.
As the kind of father of the Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, and as you reflect back, what's the John Jablonski legacy?
I hope to have conserved the best of the habitats around Chautauqua Lake and across the county, and inspired others to do the same.
One of the things that was commenced during your time period, and it has just become a reality, in an article February 22nd, Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy, we did it. It's official. The Chautauqua Watershed Conservancy is now a nationally accredited land trust. Not a lot of those. So how did that happen? What was the genesis behind that?
Well, it has been our goal to operate at the highest standards in the industry that we're in, and we probably about 5 years ago received a grant to work with a consultant that has worked with several land trusts, and we went through an assessment and evaluation process to look at our standards and practices. What are we making, is our record keeping appropriate? Are we adequately monitoring the properties that we own or that we have easements on? Where are our shortcomings? And after having that assessment done, worked on it for another couple of years, and then really tried to make sure that we are operating at the highest standards of any land trust across the country, for the benefit of all the people who generously invest in our work, to make sure that that land is going to be protected long after you and I aren't here anymore. And, we owe that to our donors and funders, and fortunately, we were able to achieve that after about a year and a half of all kinds of documentation and digitizing our records and things like that, just piles of records to be digitized, and records retention, really important for land trusts. We have to be able to defend our properties that we get, and make sure that they can be legally defended from the neighbors who might do things that we don't like.
It's only awarded to land trusts who have completed a very vigorous review process and successfully shown fiscal accountability, strong organizational leadership, sound transactions, and lasting stewardship of the lands they conserve. That's quite a statement, and perhaps a formal recognition of what you started 33 years ago, John. That's remarkable.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I really appreciate seeing that happen, and we have a tremendous staff in place now that made it happen. So I'm very proud of the staff that made accreditation possible.
Well, that's a recognition also of all that you've accomplished. And I know it's a team, and I know it's a group, but ultimately there's a quarterback in the mix, and that was you. And what started off as a white pad in Chatham, Massachusetts, found itself into reality here in Chautauqua County, and specifically Chautauqua Lake, and we're the beneficiaries of your terrific skill set. So thank you.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity tonight. I feel so honored to have been invited here.
Well, great. John Jablonski, thank you. Wonderful.